Hello, and welcome to New Frontiers in Object-Based Teaching, exploring the resources available at NEHMA. My name is Danielle Stewart. I am Head of Academic Initiatives at the Nora, Eccles, Harrison Museum of Art, or NEHMA, and I'm going to present a few of the options that are available for teaching with objects and teaching with primary source materials at NEHMA. So just as an introduction, the mission of Nora Eccles Harrison Museum of Art is to foster engagement with modern and contemporary art and to facilitate learning and promote dialogue about ideas important to the people of Utah and the mission of Utah State University. Because we are a campus museum, but a museum that's part of a land-grant university, we really have kind of this twofold focus. One part is reaching out to the community and to local families and elementary school groups and bringing them into the museum. But we're also really focused on being an asset specifically to the university students at USU. And my role is really to cater to this audience, to the USU faculty and students, and to share with them ways that they can use NEHMA as a learning tool. And I have a few goals in my role as the head of academic initiatives. And one is to make NEHMA a part of every student's educational journey. I think it's a shame that we have such a great facility for learning about modern art on campus. There's a lot of students who kind of get through their USU education without ever visiting NEHMA. And we want to make sure that there's a way that all students get to visit NEHMA at some point in their academic career. This might be as simple as visiting for part of connections, as they're new freshman students. I know that not all students will be just, seeking out the art museum as a place of relaxation. I know that that's not everyone's cup of tea, but we hope that everyone will see that it's a resource that they can use. Another part of our mission, and my mission specifically in my role, is to provide services to every department on campus. We want to be able to work with at least one faculty member in every single department, whether it's engineering or business, as well as some kind of the more obvious connections with art and art history, to find ways to incorporate some of our resources into their curriculum. And that's something that I'm going to talk about more in this presentation. And then we also want to help students, faculty, and staff see NEHMA as an essential campus resource akin to the library. So, I think most of you would agree that you wouldn't expect a student to get through USU and never have entered the doors of the library, right? And we see NEHMA as the same kind of tool. It perhaps doesn't have some of the breadth that the library does, but hopefully throughout the course of this presentation, you'll learn about some ways that the resources that we have in NEHMA can be incorporated into any curriculum. Okay, so one of the most obvious ways that art and the resources at NEHMA can be used for those who are kind of outside the humanistic disciplines is through a method called visual teaching strategies. And visual teaching strategies is a strategy really that focuses on deep looking and deep thinking and kind of slowing down the learning process. So especially in our kind of current day and age, students can get used to just scrolling through text, scrolling through Wikipedia entries, scrolling through images, and trying to absorb things as fast as possible. But the process of kind of slowing down, looking more deeply, analyzing, and then going back and searching for new visual clues can actually help students to integrate learning better and to find deeper solutions to problems. And I think that that is really an important part of university education, where you're trying to become someone who's not just a specialist in a single discipline or a technician in a single discipline, but someone who thinks universally, thinks widely, thinks broadly, is kind of a more well-rounded person. And I think it's also really important in our current day when we have, so many entrenched ideas, so much problems with civic dialogue and with polarization. This process of kind of thinking slowly and seeing slowly can actually help you, become more empathetic and to kind of have a deeper appreciation for ideas beyond your own and to see alternate meanings, right? And so those are things that are really important in any discipline, whether it be the humanities or whether it be the sciences. There's been a lot of research into how visual thinking strategies can aid in scientific disciplines, especially things like nursing and social work. places where there's not only an element of observation, but also kind of the need for human contact and, bedside manner and that kind of thing, that it can make students more open and empathetic and more able to kind of communicate issues on a human scale rather than just being sort of narrowly focused on getting a particular job done. And I've listed a couple of references here on this slide that if you're interested in seeing how visual teaching strategies, the kind of scientific data behind how visual teaching strategies helps in a discipline like nursing, you can look at some of these. But just to summarize, incorporating visual teaching strategies into the classroom curriculum can help improve students' time spent on observation, right? So instead of making snap judgments, really taking the time to do visual analysis and to think in depth about what problems might be, rather than kind of jumping to conclusions. It can help with descriptive depth, right? So if you're trying to teach your students to be able to communicate more effectively in written form, visual teaching strategies can actually give them more tools to be able to work on that descriptive element of their writing or research presentation, a tolerance of ambiguity. And this is especially true when it's applied to students in the scientific disciplines, where perhaps some of these kind of soft skills aren't taught as much as they would be in the humanities. Students who engage with VTS also report improvements in listening skills, collaboration, and learning to appreciate multiple perspectives, right? And this is really where I see VTS as something that can improve a student holistically to become kind of more of that global citizen that we want to help them become as part of the university education. And VTS really focuses on just slow observation and questioning and kind of bringing to the surface what kind of questions an object raises rather than what answers you might find from an object. So we do a lot of visual teaching workshops at the museum, especially with our new connection students, but we do them with other classes as well that focus on what questions can I ask of this object? What might this teach me? What emotions might be latent in this object? What kind of extrapolations can I make to larger world events via this object, right? So it might not be something that's particular to your discipline, but it is something that studies show help to improve students' overall learning outcomes, regardless of the discipline. And that's one way that kind of NEHMA could be used in any classroom across campus, right? Whether it's in the business school or whether it's in an engineering discipline, all students can benefit from this ability to slow down their listening and slow down their observation and work on their descriptive powers. Okay, museum-based learning strategies and VTS are not, and these are things that I want to emphasize here, I'm not just talking about lessons in art and art history and aesthetics, unless that's what you want. So, I do offer museum visits for the art historians or for the art department members that are geared toward these kind of very discipline specific discussions of art. But that's not the only thing we do. We offer a wide variety of services at NEHMA, and that's one of the things that I want to highlight. They're not also unnecessarily or fluff that distracts from the real curriculum. When you look at studies about student retention and lesson retention, very often students are not always kind of retaining individual facts, but rather kind of a process of learning. And so, VTS and museum-based learning strategies go towards becoming, like I said, this more well-rounded thinker, which is going to help across the disciplines. And it's not also only for humanist disciplines. Since I've been here at USU, which has only been a year, we've worked with faculty in ecology and in religious studies and in the business school. So, kind of worked across all of the departments. And like I said, the goal is to offer some sort of service to every department on campus. So we really want to find ways that we can be useful to you. So I'm going to just talk about a few different options for working with NEHMA and the kind of teaching resources that we offer. I want to emphasize that these are only options. These are things that I've done in the past or that have been done at other universities, but I'm really open to collaborating with faculty in any way that you think might be helpful to your class. So someone's described my position before as boutique teaching. I have a PhD. I have taught in the classroom for several years. But my focus at NEHMA is kind of going around with individual professors and saying, okay, how can we enhance your curriculum and your teaching through the resources that we offer at NEHMA. And that can be anything from, having students do self-guided kind of scavenger hunts in the museum, to sitting down and having a lecture that we give, to artistic collaborations. And I'm going to show kind of examples of a few of those options. So as I've been mentioning, I've talked a little bit about VTS, or visual thinking strategies, and at a deep looking session. These are things that we offer, across the disciplines, like I mentioned. They usually last about a half an hour to 45 minutes. And these are activities. Sometimes they're kind of free-form writing activities, but they can also be group discussions. If you contact me and are interested in this, I can kind of give you a range of different options of how a VTS session could be delivered. But they offer students an opportunity to, like I said, sit down, really take time to visually analyze, explore, explain what they're seeing, and then make questions as well as observations about what might be going on in a particular scene. And as I've mentioned, this helps drastically improve it helps to improve students' abilities to communicate, their written descriptions of processes that they might be describing for a research paper, for example, as well as thinking of other possible options beyond the most obvious ones for why something might be happening, right? So especially in a scientific field where you're always coming up with new hypotheses and kind of thinking about new ways that things might be working, this can be really helpful for students to kind of get out of the box of just thinking of the quickest answer and kind of having more exploratory thinking. Another way that you can teach with NEHMA is through individualized museum tours. So for example, I recently worked with a professor in the religion department who was teaching a class on horses in religious iconography. We went through the museum and found or pulled out and displayed different images of horses in religious iconography. And then her class came through and did a tour, and we talked about these depictions with the students. The students kind of had to generate some of their own ideas about what they thought might be going on in the images. But we also, gave them some explanations that we knew about the art. So, right, this was kind of a combination of student-led discussion and kind of a mini lecture on depictions of horses in art. And then that was followed up in the classroom with an assignment by the teacher, right? So if you have a particular topic that you're interested in exploring, I'd be more than happy to talk to you about, how we might be able to organize a museum tour around that topic. It's slightly dependent on what we currently have on display. Sometimes we can pull things out. And starting in January, actually, we'll have the capacity to pull more things because we will actually have a classroom space in the museum to use where we can pull objects and then have students come in and look at them. These individualized museum tours can really enrich and enhance your curriculum, get the students out of the classroom, get them kind of on their feet and a little bit more energized when you're kind of halfway through the semester and everyone's, starting to get a little bit dazed. Very similarly, we can work on putting together a curated chest of drawers. And you're seeing here in this image, one of these kind of chests of drawers. Now, these can only hold generally smaller objects. So those are often works on paper or photography, but we've had faculty come together and say, we really want a chest of drawers that's all political iconography. So we can pull out things in our collection that have to do with political rallies. Our collection is primarily US based, right? So we're not going to have a lot of political things from Europe, for example, but we do have, pins from presidential elections, Black Panther newspapers, things from the civil rights movement, and we've pulled those out and then talked about how that imagery and those objects were used to further political causes. I've also curated a chest of drawers for a photography professor who, was teaching an intro to photography class and wanted to have his students kind of look at the individual images and talk about how they were created, talk about what they were showing, what they were focusing on, what they were, diminishing, or what was in the background of the images, right? So that's a really great way to have kind of an intimate conversation with students around a particular set of objects. And I want to emphasize that both with this and with the tours, the amount of input that the individual faculty has in the creation of the curated chest or the creation of the tour is really variable. Some faculty members want to have really tight control over what happens, and they want to kind of lead the lectures and lead the discussion. Other faculty members are very happy for the chance to hand the reins over to someone else and to like get an outsider's input, or to, you know, have kind of a day of a break from teaching. And I'm happy to work in either way, right? I'm happy to kind of advise, but leave the primary teaching role up to the faculty member in question. I'm also very happy to say, you know, here's what we have, and I'm, you know, prepared to make a lecture on that for you, or to lead a discussion on those objects for you, right? So I always say that this is a great opportunity if you want to kind of kick back and take a day off. You know, you have like a big report due or a big conference presentation coming up, then schedule a teaching session at NEHMA, and you'll have, you know, a lot less prep to do for that particular week. We've also done creative collaborations. So this might be something more with those humanistic and artistic disciplines again. But for example, we had the composition class create new compositions that were somehow rooted in or related to works on display at NEHMA, and then give a concert performance in the NEHMA space that related to those objects. We've also had students come in and write poetry in front of our works of art. So that's a great exercise for the English department. We also had, you know, faculty give concerts where they use our works of art and they project our works of art during the concert, right? So there's a lot of different creative collaborations between the arts, and those can be some of, I think, the most powerful uses of the museum. Also, if you're in a creative discipline and you just want to come and sketch in the museum for the day, or you want to come, you know, sing in the museum for the day, we have really great acoustics. We're open to scheduling those kinds of things too. You don't necessarily have to be always using, you know, a museum exhibition, or your work doesn't always have to be geared towards a museum exhibition. You can just use our space, just get in contact with me and let me know, so that we don't have any like, we wouldn't want you to come in and try singing while there was like a kindergarten class running around. There's also research assignments that can be done with the NEHMA objects. There's a lot of room for research in a lot of our collection, because a lot of it's American art and modern art. It hasn't always been as deeply researched as, you know, some kind of European and more antiquated subject matters. And so, you know, it's great for students to be able to do a research assignment where they can actually kind of handle and feel the object. We don't actually allow you to touch the art on display, but we can set up you know, viewing sessions with an individual class where students can like look at photographs up close, or look at works on paper up close, and use those as evidence in a paper about historical farming methods, or about you know, sociological impacts during the Great Depression, right? We have those kind of images at our disposal, and we're happy to pull them out for students. We just need to have advance notice so we can schedule those kinds of viewing sessions. And then also the museum, like I said, is a space that's open for teaching. So you can also just host a class in the museum if you want to, that can be related to museum subject matter or not. We've had, like, for example, a film studies class that the students kind of made their own films, and then they used our room as a projection room. And then they also kind of did like a little mini tour of the museum, so that they could kind of have some artistic inspiration from the things that were on display. But it doesn't have to be a film studies class. It doesn't have to be, you know, kind of anything that relates to the museum directly. If you just want to give your students a field trip, or if you know, want to kind of get them out of their shell, get them out of their regular space, we do have, you know, a projection room available, and we're happy to have classes come in and use the space, whether or not it directly relates to the museum, to what's on display at the museum. The main idea is that we get students into the museum, get them through the doors, get them familiar with the space, and allow them to know that, you know, this is a place of learning that's open to them as well. Okay. So just as an overview, here's some of the ways I and some of my colleagues have used the museum on campus and other campus museums in order to explore things across the disciplines. I've had students come in and do self-led or research assignments, right, where their teachers ask them to look for something in the museum and do visual analysis on their own. So this is kind of like almost like a VTS session that's unguided, but it just gets students kind of into a new space on campus. We've had exhibition specific visits. So for example, when we just had our Facing Fire exhibition last year, we had a lot of visits from ecology and biology and disciplines that maybe don't come into the museum as often because there was something specific on display that related to their subject matter, and I try to reach out to faculty to let them know if there's something that, might be applicable to their specific subject. But also, I encourage you to think about NEHMA as kind of a field trip resource for your students. We've had visits where we talk about creative strategies for elementary education. For those of you who are maybe involved in the elementary education school, we do talk about how VTS can be worked into elementary school classrooms and how artistic studies can be worked into our elementary school classrooms. VTS has been used a lot for psychology and social work because, again, it helps to kind of slow down and to not make, snap judgments, but to think about, other possible explanations for things that students see. We've had exhibitions on representations of historical agricultural practices, right, that have tie over with a lot of our ag sciences department, that if you're ever doing a more history-based or, historical methods kind of research, we have resources that can help you with that. Anything that has to do with American history or American politics, we can pull up images that deal with that. Religious iconography and art as well. And then, of course, for the art faculty out there, we can have discussions of artistic methods and do kind of a more traditional art historical analysis of the works. But, that's just one way to use the museum. It's not the only way. Okay. I also want to emphasize that while NEHMA really focuses on, using the original objects, using original materials, we also understand that we're part of this statewide campus, and we want our resources to be available to those who are engaged in remote learning or who are elsewhere on other USU campuses. And so we do have a variety of website resources, including an image database that has the vast majority of our works are there. We have online walkthroughs of our exhibitions. So this is just a screenshot here that you're seeing of kind of the splash page for one of our current exhibitions. If you scroll to the bottom of the screen, then there would be a link that said, see virtual tour, and you can actually kind of virtually tour NEHMA. So if your students can't make it onto campus, you can still have ways for them to kind of access the museum resources online. We have an archive of past exhibits, and we also have spaces for educational request forms. So if you want to do something in the museum, either remotely or on campus at Logan, you can fill out an educational request form there, and then I'll get in contact with you and work with you on, what form that assignment or that museum visit is going to take, what's going to work best for you and your class and your learning goals. And like I said, these are really individualized, unique visits that depend on what the individual faculty want. So don't feel like, you're putting me out at all to request a very specific thing. If I can do it, I will. If we have the resources, I'll find a way to make it work. I'm really here to be a resource specifically for USU faculty. This is my entire position. So I'm always looking forward to new challenges and new ways to approach learning in the museum. And, I really want to work together with you. I want to get to know as many of you as possible. I really want to serve your educational needs. I want NEHMA to be a place where students feel comfortable. So please don't hesitate to reach out. This is my email address and my on-campus number. I think I've also put here, my mobile number is also here on the second slide. So if I'm not in the office, right, or if I'm out leading a tour, you can leave me a voice memo and I'd be happy to get back to you. I'm also happy to hear about the kinds of things that you'd like to see at NEHMA or you'd like to have displayed at NEHMA so that we can work that into our curatorial agenda as well. So just to kind of recap, NEHMA is a space for all USU students and faculty, and we're really prioritizing the use of the museum as a learning tool. And my position reflects that this is kind of my whole job, to reach out to faculty and say, how can I serve you? So please do be in contact if you think that a visit to NEHMA would aid your class. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And I look forward to hearing from many of you.